Hello, everybody. We're right before Passover here at Yair's studio in the mountains of Beitar Elite. The people don't think they're elite. They're very humble, but everyone else knows they are. And Yair is here, so that shows, right? This is an elite crowd we got up here. It's a religious community. It's a covenantal faith community, a dynamic community up here in the hills. So, Yair's from Australia. You know what they call Passover in Australia? Pass under, right? I knew you knew that. So I'm going to hit a few different topics concerning our beloved brothers, Ephraim, Yosef, our 10 tribes, the lost Judah within the 10 tribes, and the lost 10 tribes within Judah. What a situation we have. So we're facing getting out of Egypt right in front of us. You guys know, of course, right? The word Egypt in Hebrew means straits, constriction. So getting out of Egypt is the idea of breaking bonds and boundaries and limitations and being able to open ourselves up to fill our mouth with God's presence. You all know that, right? So do I. And that's what Egypt is. That's why we see ourselves as getting out of Egypt. But if you just ask a regular person who got out of Egypt, they'll tell you the Jews. But I seem to remember it was all 12 tribes that got out of Egypt. The Hebrew nation got out of Egypt. That's something we can remind our brothers of Judah, that it wasn't only, even though Jews and Judah is a generic term for all the tribes, we still have to remember it was all the tribes that got out of Egypt together. And that's why I guess a lot of you guys are doing that with your Passover ceremonies. If you take Eliyahu Yaakov, you heard of him? He wrote Jewish by Choice. I want to quote a few things he said. He has a thing called New Light. He's actually a great Torah scholar. I think he has a lot of great insights which are relevant. Whenever you have famous and brilliant rabbis that more or less to what they're saying agree with Yair Davidiy, it makes me happy. The truth is coming out. The truth is out there. So in any event, we're having a big event. And please, the 10 tribes that want to mix Christianity in with their Passover Seder, do you know that Moses' name is not mentioned in the Haggadah? Because all the emphasis is on the Holy One, blessed be He, the Holy One of Israel. So we don't want to distract it and just think we have a national hero like Khmelnytsky was for the Ukrainians who murdered all those Jews, if you remember. And all these other famous, George Washington, and all the emphasis is about him. Our historic book we use to celebrate the going out of Egypt doesn't mention Moses. So why are you guys mentioning somebody else through the entire service? It's not in harmony with the Bible. It's not in harmony with biblical Judaism. It's making a mockery of it. Listen, I'm just going to remind you, the Muslims have 700 proofs to prove that their mythology is our Messiah, which is many times more than the Christian proofs, which are no proofs if you take them in context. So once you already decide something, you superimpose your decision on everything. So you have to be a little intellectually honest and a little humble if you want to connect to the real messages of the returning of the tribes. One of the things I wanted to mention is that if you take a deeper step, a further step, that the whole Hebrew nation itself, each soul is its own unique aspect of the divine presence, its own expression of God's clarity in this world, the Shekhinah. Therefore, when Yaakov was on his deathbed, the Torah relates that he called his children to gather together. Remember Mordechai from the tribe of Benjamin, who was called Mordechai the Jew in the book of Esther? They used kinus at the Yudim, the gathering of the nation. He, especially with the children who are innocent and have tremendous power with God. So he gathered together his children in order that they would tell him what would happen in the end of days. If you could examine the Hebrew, you would see that. But So indicating the necessity for togetherness and unity among the descendants of Yaakov, the individual aspects of the divine presence, the Shekhinah, in order for the end of days to actually come about. Did you get that? So he called us to gather together. So what's he saying? All the tribes have to gather together. We have to be connected to each other. That's a crucial, absolute, necessary ingredient for our redemption. And that's what Brit-Am is doing. It's helping unite Judah with the tribes and tribes back with Judah. And that's a divine mission to create that bridge over quiet waters. So while Messianic times are spoken about as an era of peace and tranquility, what's the real big deal about the Messianic times? It comes down to one thing: an experiential, intimate oneness relationship with the Infinite One, brought about and made accessible by a grand revelation and expression of God clarity at that time. The achievement of this messianic level of clarity of God is the mission statement of the Hebrew nation. This is what is meant by when the Jewish people are called Or LaGoyim, a light to the nations. That's what the Hebrew nation was doing in the cloak of a Gentile cloak. They were also being, the Western European nations were being a light to the nations. When we talk about the Shekhinah being lifted and raised, that's the nation of Israel being lifted and raised to be a light to the nations. Whereas God clarity is presently in the depths below and hidden away, in Messianic times, God clarity will be expressed and revealed. And when this arrives, the aspects of the Shekhinah, that is, the souls of the Hebrew nation, will be true to themselves by reflecting and bringing forth God clarity by living out Torah in a one-of-a-kind set of circumstances and custom-designed situations they are placed in. You get what I'm trying to say? And then we'll be united as one. After all, how can the picture of God be apparent if the pieces making up the picture of themselves scattered? Right? There's this giant piece. By every single person, by the way, has something to contribute to the Messianic era and making it happen. Sometimes when people ask the Lubavitcher Rebbe, could you possibly be Messiah? He said, well, you could be Messiah. Everyone has their own unique contribution to make towards the final redemption. So our oral Torah teaches that when the sea split for the Hebrew nation as they were leaving Egypt, which essentially was the birth of the Hebrew nation, it did not merely split once down the middle, as you might expect. Rather, there were all these compartments. It split in several places, actually, in 12 independent splits of the sea, one for each tribe, with a wall of water standing between them. Transparent enough that they could catch a glimpse of people behind that wall. And in these walls of water, so this water, which you could see partially through, were like windows to enable each tribe to see that there were paths across the sea in addition to the one it was crossing through, indicating that each tribe has its own unique path towards God. Similarly, the Talmud, which holds our oral Torah, which explains the written Torah, relates that each of the tribes also spoke its own dialect of Hebrew. By the way, if you're interested in a linguistic study and seeing the relevance of English, you should not forget that Yair made a Hebrew English by Yair Davidiy, the Israelite language, as part of English speech and thought patterns. You got that? Put that on your reading list. If you want to be in, if you don't want to be out. If you're not reading Yair's literature, you're out. You got to be in, right? So if we follow the story of the Hebrew nation in the desert, we find that they came to Mount Sinai. to receive the Torah. The Torah says that they encamped there. But the Hebrew word for encamped is plural. Well, it should be plural. They encamped. But it's singular. Everybody knows this. All Jewish kids know what I'm telling you right now. Instead of plural. So it means showing that they encamped with one heart, with one goal. And that unity is crucial. It wasn't just a grammatical error. God didn't make a grammatical error with his Hebrew. You got it? So it's everything in the 5 books of Moses. That's why we have noses, to keep them in the 5 books of Moses, is there to teach us important life messages. So rather, it means to point out that while the Hebrew nation may be living as a multitude in the physical realm, they had achieved a unity among them by which they existed beyond that level of perception as a cohesive unit. Just as a person's body functions with each part in its proper place, doing what it's supposed to be doing, living out and actualizing its individualistic role in the context of the greater whole, so too the Hebrew nation were like one body, functioning in unison with a holistic sense of self-identity, each individual seeing himself as a unique, irreplaceable part of the nation as a whole. So at Mount Sinai, each piece of the puzzle was present, efficiently expressing the reality of who and what it was, without trying to get all the other puzzle pieces to look and act just like him. So I think it's amazing. Our oral Torah shows us how when the tribes came out of Egypt, they were cognizant that theirs was not the only path. But this is not chaotic. Our paths within the Torah are disciplined and restricted and going in harmony with the whole 24 books of the Hebrew Bible and the over 23,000 verses of the Hebrew Bible. It's not in any way New Age. But it's big and broad, and the landscape is amazing. We have the schools of Hillel and Shammai. They're well known for their numerous disputes, but it's also well known to you that they married their children to each other, because their disputes were for the sake of heaven, and they could see that, like, God's word is infinite. God's word is like a diamond. There are many facets to it, and it shines in different ways according to the angle of the light. So they were trying to shine light onto his words, and they came out with different perspectives. But they were all doing it within the same system. And remember, who's in charge of that system? Judah is the lawgiver. They have a lot more years of practice doing this. So, you know what the DNA of biblical Judaism is? Everyone's into DNA, RNA today, right? We all had science courses in the last period of time, or anti-science courses, right? So the nation of Israel, or the DNA of biblical Judaism, and this is what Brit-Am is expressing, the DNA of the Hebrew nation. It's a strand of DNA is taken from the head is identical to a strand of DNA that is taken from the foot. This means that the head DNA contains the properties of the foot within it, and the foot DNA contains the properties of the head within it. So it is not that the head and foot are completely different. Rather, in the head elements of DNA are actively expressed, while the foot elements passively fall to the background. And in the foot elements of the DNA are actively expressed, while the head elements passively fall to the background. That is to say, when it comes to DNA, there is a universal inner essence, and the entire body shares, and a particular external expression unique to each part of the body. So in a sense, the nation of Israel as a body is an expression of God's will, and each soul is rooted in a part of this kind of body, so there is a universal essence that all the souls in the body share, and is a particular expression that is unique to each soul in the body. So consequently, the bottom line of the Torah is a universal halacha. The laws of the Torah are equally applicable to every Hebrew. And there is a particular individual Hebrew's unique personal preference and emphasis. So, for example, a head soul might be much more inclined to learn Torah, but he still has to pray, whereas a mouth soul might be more inclined to pray, but he still has to learn Torah. And Ephraim has so many qualities, Joseph has so many qualities, and Judah has so many qualities, and we have so many redundant qualities on each other, and it's just good to know we're all intimately connected through our spiritual DNA and our spiritual RNA. I would say that the Messianic era only comes to pass when the nation of Israel reflects godliness, when each one of the Hebrew nation, in accordance with the uniqueness of his or her soul, with the intent of dedicating their distinct gift to the rest of the Hebrew nation and incorporating the distinct gifts of the rest of the nation as part of their own identity. This is similar to a puzzle. Each piece has its own unique contribution, right? Its own specific, unique contribution to make to the puzzle as a whole, yet incorporates the puzzle as a whole as part of its own identity. If those two sticks are coming together, and we have to bind Ephraim back to Judah, well, Judah is not going to become more like Ephraim. Ephraim's going to have to become more like their seasoned, law-giving, scholarly, righteous brother. So after all, the puzzle itself is a grand, all-inclusive picture, greater than the total of its pieces. So too, each Hebrew soul has its own unique light to contribute to the Hebrew people as a whole, and the Jewish people, Ephraim, Joseph. It's a grand, all-inclusive light, greater than the total of all its lights. So by the culmination, actualization, and coming together, each unique individual, the Hebrew soul as one, the Hebrew people act and serve as the light by which God is illuminated, clarified, and made perceivable to this world. I really think that who is making this light perceivable? There's so much darkness out there and so much confusion, even with people who have little parts of the light. The pure light is coming out of Brit-Am and Yair Davidiy's scholarship and research that reflects everything I just mentioned to you. And with that, I'm going to let you get back to your Passover preparations, because we don't want you to pass out or pass under. And eat a bit of that matzah bread, right? Matzah is also the bread of poverty and slavery, but at the same time it transfers into the bread of freedom. Good luck with your freedom, and use your freedom correctly. Love you all.